Hello, college football fans. Welcome to episode 129 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined in person by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, Husker fans and college football fans.
Yes, we are back for an in-person episode of College Football Throwdown. I am here in the beautiful Traverse City, Michigan, visiting family for this next week. And we are here today to talk about Nebraska's loss to Georgia Southern, as well as the sudden news that our head coach, Scott Frost, has been fired, as well as the many crazy upsets that happened in week 2 of college football. So there's a lot to get to today. And of course, we are a college football podcast by college football fans for college football fans. Father-son duo here to talk about all things Nebraska Cornhuskers as well as the wider world of college football. And we always kick things off with a beverage. I think we could especially use one after Saturday's performance.
Yes, absolutely.
So we got a pair of Labatt Blues
Labatt
here.
Blue. One of the classic beers of most Michiganders.
Yep. All right.
Here we go. And we get to drink it together. Cheers, son.
Cheers.
Awesome.
All right. Also, listeners out there might hear some rain in the background. We're recording this from Dad's RV, and it is a rainy Sunday night here in Michigan, so keep that in mind. But yeah, to start things off, of course, we have the Georgia Southern game, which is another one of those games where we were expected to win, and should have, been able to use it as a confidence booster going into the really big Oklahoma game that we have next week. And we gave our predictions on the previous podcast, both being optimistic, thinking that we would win. I predicted 42-28, while you predicted higher scoring 49-35. And the final score ended up, of course, being 45 for Georgia Southern, 42 for Nebraska. So we were on the right track that it was going to be a high-scoring game, because we saw that Georgia Southern put up like 50-plus points on their previous opponent the week before us. But the fact that our defense ended up giving up over 600 yards to their offense was a shock, I think, to us. And it could have been even worse in terms of points because Georgia Southern made some mistakes that, if they had been a little bit more efficient, they could have gotten, to 50 or 60 points.
Right. And that's the bottom line is that we were simply unable to make any kind of real significant adjustment over the course of that entire game, even though it was apparent from the very get-go that our defensive alignment, they were picking it apart.
Right. And to Shenander, the defensive coordinator's credit, in the second half, we did switch to more of a zone for the passing game, and the defensive line did stiffen up in that, they got into some third and short situations or fourth downs where we were able to, stop them at the goal line and some things like that. So I think we did make some adjustments that helped later on. They weren't getting such easy, one single breakaway run for a touchdown sort of things in the second half. But we still weren't able to consistently stop them. And when it came down to it, at the very end of the fourth quarter, right after we scored and we're up by 4, they just needed to get one stop, and it was even down to a 4th and 2, where if we stop them there and get like one more first down, it was basically game over. And we gave up that 4th down. You'll recall, there were like 2 opportunities potentially for interceptions on that last drive of Georgia Southern that we couldn't bring in. And sure enough, they have a nice drive down the field to score.
Big play.
Leaving us with, 30 seconds left, 36 seconds. And we're able to get close enough for a long 52-yard field goal, but can't pull it through. And once again, lose another under 7-point game.
Right. But it's the same MO, okay? It comes in different forms. Yesterday, it was the too many and very untimely turnover issue that has plagued Scott during his entire time at Nebraska, and in fact plagued the previous coach, Mike Riley, as well. We actually won the turnover battle.
Right.
So there were some areas where we were improved over what we have been in some other previous games, but the bottom line is we still were making bonehead decisions. Our individual players were making bonehead decisions. And then just from a schematic standpoint, what Shenander came up with to defend this very unique offense, that very much a spread, literally sideline to sideline spread offense that they run, we were unable to defend it at all. It was ridiculous how wide open both receivers and running backs were pretty much throughout the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they had 2 interceptions while we had none, and neither team had any fumbles. Now, we had some close calls where, as you recall, there was one that was called a fumble and then got called that
Reversed.
Smothers was down by a millisecond, basically, before the ball came out. So we got a bit lucky, in so many cases it seems like we're snake bitten when it comes to luck, but this time we actually did get a few lucky breaks. For example, at the end of the first half when they had a nice drive, we're right on our goal line, and then had a error when snapping the ball that then caused the 10-second delay because the game was down under 2 minutes, that basically ended the first half right then and there, when they easily should have gotten a field goal, if not a touchdown.
Right.
So we went into halftime tied when we really shouldn't have been.
And so that is the real crux of this. Is just another game and the mini games that demonstrate lack of preparation, lack of fundamental instruction, like guys not understanding the fundamentals. I understand that they were running a very unique defensive setup because of the offense that this other team was running, but you still have fundamentals. And our gap integrity at the line of scrimmage was atrocious, partially because we were putting literally 6 or 5 guys in some cases in the box against their offensive line. And so they were able to hand off to a running back. He had to make one guy miss, and he was to the house. And he didn't do that once. They did that like 3 times. And at some point, you've got to adjust, bring another player into that box, and go to a zone structure that allows you to do that. Okay, that means you're going to give up some short passes, but over time, if you play it right, you're going to potentially get interceptions, or you're going to knock a ball loose because you're going to ring a guy's bell as soon as he catches the ball. And we didn't do any of that stuff. And that's the part that is just fundamentals of football, basic stuff. I don't know what the hell they're thinking.
Right. Not to mention all the bad missed tackles, that got them lots of extra yards versus if our guys had just wrapped them up at the point of contact.
You can tell my voice is still a little raspy, and that was a particularly intense item of my focus last night while watching the game. And I'm not going to name the players. Anybody who watched this game would be able to recognize them rather quickly. But guys that, you have to be able to, as a coaching staff, you have to replace a guy who's missing tackles like that. Even if he's the better player, he isn't on that day. So get him the hell out of there and have a talk with him, and maybe let him watch from the sidelines for a series or 2, and then let him back out and see if he tackles better. But they didn't do that.
Right. And one area where we were making a lot of mistakes was in terms of penalties. We had 10 penalties for 77 yards, while they had 3 for 15. Now, those 3 were significant, for example, like the one at the end of the first half, right, for them. But they got 4 first downs just off of our penalties of their total of 34 first downs.
And their third down conversion for the game was quite incredible. I don't know the exact number.
That's actually an interesting stat. We were equal in terms of third down conversions, 9 of 13 for both teams, but we had 0 fourth downs attempted or made, whereas they had 2. So really that's more like 11 of...
And they made both of them.
Right. So 11 of 15, right, if you combine the 2 together.
Right. But they started the game off like 5 for 5 or 6 for 6.
It was
so early
7
on
for 7, actually.
Okay, early on in the game, every single time they got to a third down, they converted. So our defense just simply was not able to get them off the field, and as a result, that the defense was on the field quite a bit. Because they couldn't stop them, and then our offense was either scoring quickly also, or it was given up a 3 and out, in which case the defense was back on the field again.
Right. And in general, the offense obviously did play pretty well. We scored 42 points. We had a total of 575 yards of total offense, 257 rushing, 318 passing. So in most situations, you would like to think that would be enough to win you a football game, especially when you're playing, an Sun Belt conference school. But then they had 233 yards of rushing, 409 yards of passing, and for a total of 642 yards.
That's painful to even listen to.
Yeah. So that was the story of the night, was that, Casey Thompson was playing pretty well, completing the majority of his passes and even running it in certain situations where he needed to, get a hard first down or some good yards. Anthony Grant had another good night. He had 27 carries for total 138 yards. A.J. Allen had 8 carries for 76 yards. Wow. Marcus Washington had 6 catches for 123 yards.
Yeah.
So
we got talent.
Exactly. We have talent, and we could see it out on the field. There were a few situations where we did, like the very first series of the game, we got the ball. We immediately had a penalty that pushed us back, and Casey Thompson got sacked, and we basically went 3 and out and kicked it back to them immediately. So it was not off to a good start to the game.
Right.
But in general, offense played pretty well. It's the defense that majorly let us down in this game.
Right. And just to make sure that we don't get too focused in on this game and understand that this is a bigger picture issue, right? This is a program that was undisciplined, that had a variety of errors and mistakes and decision-making processes that were either knee-jerk or just poorly thought through, and as a result, they continue to blow up in the face of the team. I want to minimize my criticism of the players and maximize my criticism of the coaching staff, because I really think a lot of it is on them, and not just about preparation for this week. It's about what they do in the offseason. It's about what they were doing all spring and all fall camp. When he got the extension to keep his job for another year, even though most people in the country would have agreed that it was time to fire him last year, the whole logic was to give him another year to right the ship, so to speak. And there was enough evidence in those first 3 games to clearly show that he did not make good use of his time in this past offseason. He accumulated some great talent, but he did not put together the situation that he needed to for success.
Right. We got the new offensive coaching staff, a lot of new transfers, new special teams coach. We've seen some of the results of that. Like you say, there's clearly talent on this team, but the same fundamental problems are still there in that we're not playing good, sound, fundamental football. We aren't practicing enough with full tackle in practices, so our players aren't ready for it when it actually comes to be game time. And when you look at Scott on the sidelines, he's typically just kind of hanging his head or, not really emoting much. And then they'd show Clay Helton, USC's former coach, on the Georgia Southern side of the ball. He's out there yelling and getting his players fired up, and cheering every time they score and stuff like that.
Right.
And it seems clear that obviously it's a tough situation for Scott, knowing he has the, axe over his head, so to speak. But you'd like to see, him really putting in 110% effort, right, to try to save this opportunity that he's been given.
Right, and trying to inspire his team with some show of emotion himself that, hey, this is important to me, this should be important to you, and we have an opportunity to win this football game. You didn't see him even getting in there with an intense clap of the hands with his team. You know what I mean? Like, he wasn't even in there doing a little bit of that. He was just kind of off on his own whenever they would put the camera on him. And yet the opponent, that coach Helton, every time they had the camera on that dude, he was showing intensity.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, like you say, another kind of unfortunate last-minute loss to a team that we should be able to beat. And we were out doing some family activities here today, visiting some of the beautiful wineries that are here in Traverse City. And then Dad goes, "Oh no," or "Oh wow," and turns out Scott Frost was fired just the day after this disappointing loss. A bit of a surprise to us. I know we talked a little bit last week about, the potential, in terms of the potential time frame where Scott might be fired, because October 1st was the date that his buyout for his contract went down significantly by, I believe, $7 million. And there was this discussions of, well, does it make sense to fire him mid-season? Do you want to wait till the end, et cetera, et cetera? But Trev pulled the trigger pretty quickly. We've even seen a comment suggesting that he was thinking about it seriously right after the Ireland game with Northwestern.
Right. Exactly. So,
yeah.
I'm sorry. I have no speech on that.
Yeah. And it's just so frustrating for us Nebraska fans, because at the time that Scott was hired, nobody was questioning it, because he was coming off of an amazing undefeated season with UCF. He was one of the hottest coaches in the country, and he's, the prodigal son coming back home, a good old boy, and he's young, so if he was successful, he could have been at Nebraska for decades to come. So everybody wanted him to succeed really badly, especially after the whole Mike Riley situation, when we thought, okay, having a young coach who can bring more energy into the program is really what we need right now.
Right.
And it's just so frustrating that whatever magic he was able to make happen at UCF just never came together here.
Right. And that is the thing. And I will wholeheartedly admit that I was 100% on board with the Scott hire. He was the right guy at that time. I would have argued to my grave about that. So I cannot criticize that hire, right, from the previous athletic director and such. And we gave Scott Frost every opportunity, including committing to build the new facilities, which are going to be done now for whoever the new coach is. I mean, we'll talk about that on another podcast, but the reality is Nebraska is uniquely positioned to attract a lot of coaches who might be interested in this job, even though we have sucked for 20 years.
Yep. Well, we've had a lot of these discussions last year when it seemed like it was pretty likely that Scott was going to get fired last year because we had such a disappointing season. And, there's a lot that makes Nebraska appealing, right? Because you're going to get paid good money, not like top tier money, but good money. You have a rabid fan base that's going to be behind you 100%. And if you can be the one to turn the ship around, you'll be beloved across the whole state. You'll be a superstar within the state of Nebraska, because that head football coach is one of the most well-known people in the whole state. So there's a lot of upsides to it. We can get talent. We have great facilities. The support staff, the money dedicated to the football program is very good, in terms of the wider country and everything. So we just need somebody with, I think what we're looking for this time, we won't go through all of the many possibilities that are out there for a potential head coach, but we're really looking for somebody with experience and sound fundamentals. I'm not looking for somebody to come in with like, I got such a fancy new system, it's going to wow everybody, just come in and drill down to the basics and get those down to a science, because that's what's been lacking in the Riley era and the Frost era.
In the press conference announcing that Scott was fired, Trev Alberts was very clear that leadership, and that doesn't mean coaching. He spoke in terms of leadership being clearly one of his top priorities. Character being another, and then fundamentals, strong, powerful football, right? And pride, commitment, dedication, all those characteristics that are indicative of the, for lack of a better term, the past age of Nebraska football under Bob Devaney and Tom Osborne, where we had that as staples, as anchors to our program. And so he's not looking, like you say, he's not looking for somebody who's got the newfangled defense or the newfangled offense nearly as much as he's looking for somebody who has a track record of being a fundamentals coach and who's going to take what talent he has and mold an offense around it.
Exactly. One other thing he mentioned in there was, one of the big reasons why he chose to fire Scott now, right? Because it is early, obviously, only game 3 into the season. But he kept emphasizing how this was about the players, how he wants to give them the opportunity to salvage the season, give them hope, give them a new perspective, a new mindset. And we have Mickey Joseph, our wide receivers coach, is going to be the interim head coach, which seems to be, of the assistant coaches available, he makes sense to step into that role, somebody that people respect.
He also had the title of associate head coach.
Right.
And Shenander, who's defensive coordinator, clearly has his hands full to focus on his side of the ball and figure out what the heck's going wrong and make them better.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that Shenander would have been the logical choice as the more long-standing defensive coordinator. Long-standing, he was a member of Scott's staff down in Orlando. So the bottom line is I think they, at least Trev viewed it as Shenander's got his hands full. He needs to focus on what he's got to focus on. And this is about the kids. He kept talking about this is for the players, and he's basically investing $7.5 million that he could have saved by waiting 3 weeks. He's investing that to give this group of football players a chance to have a season that still can be turned around. If he waited 3 more weeks, I think he felt like by then the season would be in the bag, so to speak, and there would be no chance of a turnaround. But now he feels like maybe he's given somebody or the team a chance to maybe still pull this rabbit out of a hat and make it into a bowl game or something.
Right. And one other thing he mentioned during his press conference was talking about the physicality of the players and how he wants to make that focus of the team again.
Right.
Which is music to our ears.
Absolutely.
Certainly.
Basics and fundamentals. And then we'll worry about getting the fancier sides of the sport to emerge on as characteristics of our team after our fundamentals are in place.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Of course, in some of those discussions about potential coaches, one that seems like it's probably not likely is Urban Meyer, who's obviously has great acumen as a coach, has won national championships and all that stuff, but has plenty of character issues that have followed him from job to job. So it doesn't seem like...
I wouldn't say it's an absolute no, but I would be very surprised if Trev was able to get comfortable with that history that he would come with. But I would tell you this, if he had conversations with Urban Meyer, the one thing Urban Meyer is, if you watch him on Fox, the pregame show and stuff, the guy's brilliant. And his ability to articulate and break down complicated football concepts, he's excellent. He's really great in that role as an analyst, to be truthful. But it also shows his acumen as a coach. And so could I sell my soul to the devil for 5 or 6 years because Urban's not a young man, and then maybe allow a guy, some other younger coach, to be his understudy with the idea that, okay, Urban's going to help build this thing and get it going in the right direction, and then some young coordinator that might come along with him is the heir apparent, much like he did with the coach at Ohio State. Urban became the head coach again at Ohio State after he served his suspension, only to have the new coach brought in who was outstanding and was his coordinator. So Urban Meyer has done that before. That would be the scenario that's the only scenario I could see.
Right. Ryan Day. Thank you. Yep.
Yeah. Couldn't remember his name. But bottom line is that something like that would be a possibility. But otherwise, I think Scott's going to be looking for that.
You mean Trev?
Trev Alberts is going to be looking for that coach that's probably in their 40s, early 50s, who's maybe got 10, 15 years left, 20 years left in his coaching career, and who's a real intense guy. One thing that was very he made a point to say it, and he said this before, is he's looking for a guy that's a grinder. He's looking for somebody who is focused on football. Football is his life. He doesn't have a bunch of outside interest and hobbies. He is a football guy, and that's the kind of guy that Trev wants.
Right. One that we talked about last year when a lot of these discussions came up is Dave Aranda from Baylor, who you love just from his both his play calling style and just his attitude as a leader, right? Talking about that side of things, which is clearly important to Trev as well.
Absolutely.
One difficulty, though, being that he just took a new contract with Baylor not too long ago, so he would be an expensive option.
Right, and I don't know that he would have any interest in it, but he had spent a considerable amount of time at Wisconsin as their defensive coordinator. He was defensive coordinator at LSU when they won a national title, and then he got the Baylor job, and he's done great things there. He's continued the great things that Matt Rule had kind of begun there. And Matt Rule's another name that's kind of on the list too. So there's a surprising number of what I would consider good options that, at least at this point, seems like they might be available to Nebraska. And when you consider the things you just quickly summarized, I mean, we've got a brand new $150 million plus facility. We're going to have one of the top athletic facilities in the country starting next year. We have a fan base that, even though we have sucked for 15 years, still fills the stadium every weekend, every home game. The amount of money that we get because we're a member of the Big Ten Conference, it's one of the tops in the country. So all of those things line up. If you're a football coach and you have aspirations, why wouldn't you take this job? This job, well, because it's hard to recruit there. Well, if you're a guy like a Mickey Joseph or a Dave Aranda or somebody like that, hey, you have confidence in yourself. You have confidence in the kind of staff that you could put together. Boom. You're on your way with some great coaches who know how to recruit, and the magic and the passion of Nebraska football will draw people in. And if we started having success, oh my gosh, it's a freight train.
Right. Although I can also see, the passion of Nebraska fans, as we know, is a double-edged sword.
It is.
Because of the scrutiny that the coach is under as well. And some coaches might look out there and say, well, the golden boy came home, Scott Frost, to try to pick Nebraska out of the mud, and even he messed up, and they tossed him out, so what's going to happen to me,
Well, I'll turn that around on you, though. I'll tell you that, oh my gosh, look at how patient they were with Scott Frost. Everybody and their brother said that we should have fired him. Same with Bo Pelini. I mean, most people were clamoring for Bo to be fired nationally before us because he had some on the field and even in the locker room or hallway incidences that were very public and not good representations on the university. And so a lot of national pundits and such were calling for his firing. So Nebraska actually has a demonstrated history of patience, with the exception of one thing, which was Frank Solich. The mistake, to begin this whole process of turnover of coaches was the mistake to not give Frank Solich more time. That's the only criticism that someone could have, that we had fired a coach who was so consistently good and had been so devoted to the program. That's the only one that I can look back on and say that's legitimate criticism. All the others, no. And if anything, I would argue that I think what's been demonstrated is the incredible patience that the administration and the fan base has given him, because the fan base did not abandon the team. We're still filling that stadium.
Right.
So someone's going to look at that who has a little confidence in themselves, and they're going to say, I can be that guy that brings Nebraska back. Not the national championships of Tom Osborne, golden era, blah, 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 but to competitiveness and competing for Big Ten West titles kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, that's what we're looking for right now.
And get paid handsomely.
Yeah. So to summarize it, in terms of the financial side of deciding to fire Scott Frost now, Dan and I don't know all of the details of that, so we won't really comment there. But just in terms of the on-field performance of the team, I think that this is the right decision for Trev to make. I felt like Scott should have been fired potentially last year, but I understand Trev's reasons for not doing it, both for financial reasons as well as the fact that there was a very crowded coaching market at the time with many high profile jobs being open and available, whereas right now we're the first major job open of the season. And I saw some people commenting that that's happened in the past, like with USC when they fired Clay Helton. They fired him early in the season.
Right.
With the early signing period and things like that in the new world of college football we live in, it can be beneficial to get a new head coach set up early enough that they can start prepping for those things later in the year. So I could see, some strategic advantages to that. But there's obviously going to be a lot of pressure now on Mickey Joseph to see what he can do to try to salvage this season, if it is possible to do so, or is the team just going to collapse and everyone's going to kind of lose hope, and we're going to be looking at like a 2-3 win season.
Okay, I'm going to try to respond to two things if I can keep my brain clicking in the right direction. Number one would be that I am not as comfortable with this firing because I really want to have an explanation for why you wouldn't wait 3 weeks and save the university and the people who make contributions, your boosters, everyone, why you wouldn't wait 3 weeks to reduce that buyout by $7.5 million. That's not a small amount of money. And to wait 3 weeks for that seems like that is a reasonable thing that's would be worth doing. So I still question that, and I think if this doesn't go well, this transition, Trev is going to be criticized to a pretty significant extent for making this decision. He's so calculating generally with his choices and decisions, and yet he was so, it seems, willing to just wave his magic wand and give up $7.5 million. That seems out of character to him. So there's something more that was at play there than that's public. Then it's public, right?
Right.
So that's number one, and then number two was I think if Mickey handles this right, he can go into that team room and say, "Listen, guys, pressure's off. Everybody expects you guys to pack it in, give it up, and move on to next year." Go to the portal, do whatever, right? We can just mail this thing in. Or we can double down. There's no pressure on us to win, and we can be the feel-good story of the season in the college football environment. And if I'm Mickey, that's what I'm selling. I'm selling them on this is what I believe we need to do. We're this close. A statement very similar to what Scott was saying. But the reason Scott never got over that hump was because he was choosing to use his time the wrong ways. And we're going to change the way we use our time, how we prepare for our opponents, and it's going to change the outcome. Okay? And sell him on that. And there's no pressure on Mickey. I mean, effectively, he's already fired, right? So the only thing he can do is, if he's successful, give himself an opportunity. If he's not, he will have no problem getting a job next year. The guy's a brilliant recruiter. He's obviously a good wide receivers coach. He will land on his feet no matter what, and he knows it.
Right. Yeah. Well, and to the point of what you're saying, I think it is, if he is going to make that sort of locker room pitch, it's smart for him to acknowledge, the rough situation, rather than trying to say, this team's so good, and I know that you guys have talent. We've been working hard all season. I think good to be a bit of a realist about it.
Right.
With the players.
I totally agree.
So, yep, it'll be very interesting to see how that goes, especially since this change is coming right before a very big game for us against Oklahoma. That's going to be at home. But that's even before this whole Scott Frost thing, we were expected to lose that game.
Right.
So the pressure to win was kind of off. Now it's definitely off.
It's interesting. I just looked on the line, and they haven't pulled it. It's at 13.5. We're a 13.5 point underdog. I would expect that might grow to like 20 because of all these circumstances. But that's maybe the perfect scenario. That's the perfect setup for Mickey to make a change and for those guys to come out fired up and for the crowd to be super intense next week.
Right. And one other thing I was going to mention was that Trev did mention in his interview that Mickey is making some structural changes, to things internally to kind of fit his vision for how things should be run. Obviously, we don't know any specifics there, but I'd be interested to see if we do see some sort of improvement, if that will become public, like, oh yeah, I shifted this around and we changed how we're doing practices, XYZ.
Right.
It's hard to make those sorts of changes mid-season, and have a significant impact, but if he could do it.
Apparently, Mickey is going to have his press conference on Tuesday, which would normally be the day that Scott would be available to the media. So we're going to hear from Mickey on Tuesday. That's the scoop that I'm getting as of Sunday night. So that'll be interesting to see what he has to say and how much he divulges. He probably will be somewhat vague, I would guess, in what the changes actually are. He'll speak in the more generic words and terms, and he's not going to go into the specifics until sometime later.
Right. I would agree with that. So, of course, there were many other games going on in the wider world of college football. And on last week's podcast, we kind of said that, oh, yeah, there aren't like too many, big top 25 type games. But it ended up being one of the craziest weekends of college football I've seen in a minute, because we had 3 top 10 teams lose,
right,
all in one day, which is pretty wild.
And not lose to lose to unranked teams.
Right. Yeah, and some of them like being other Sunbelt teams, like we lost to,
right,
Georgia Southern. This one was an interesting one. Alabama versus Texas. Of course, Texas has been kind of on hard times in the past few years, so people weren't expecting them to really be able to hang with Alabama, who's the current number 1 ranked team. But right. Alabama ended up just barely squeaking out a win of 20-19.
Alabama's they're not number 1, are they?
No, they are.
They are, and
yep.
Georgia's number 2.
Georgia's number 2.
Okay, I thought it was the other way around. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And I watched the recap of that game, and frankly, Texas should have won because they missed a very easy, like 20, 30-yard field goal, and then they had a safety on Alabama that was then called for targeting, reviewed, and it was decided that it wasn't targeting, which was blindingly obvious to everybody in that stadium because it wasn't even close. But that reset the down, and so the safety never happened. So that's 5 points right there that Texas should have gotten. Wow. So you mentioned that it's honestly kind of a perfect situation for Saban in that his team gets out of there with a W on their record, but their team made tons of mistakes, had like 15 penalties, and he's going to be able to grill those guys and get it out of their heads that you got these inflated egos because you're the number 1 team according to the media. No, you guys suck at this, and this, and we're going to get that better and go kick the ass of the team next week.
Exactly. As a coach, and particularly for Nick Saban, who's obviously the GOAT in this situation, he got exactly what he needed to basically position his team to be the best that they can be.
Mm-hmm. And another crazy one was Appalachian State, who just had a crazy game in week 1 where they lost 61-63 against North Carolina in a crazy high-scoring affair. They ended up beating Texas A&M in a much lower-scoring affair of 17-14. And Texas A&M was like ranked number 6 or something like that. So in Texas A&M Stadium, the first time Appalachian State has upset a top 10 team since the famous win against Michigan, which you and I were present for, as I recall. And, you could see these videos of the Appalachian State campus just going crazy with people flooding the streets and celebrating and everything.
Yeah,
so
that was quite the, man, they partied that night, I'm guessing, in a big way at Appalachian State.
Right. And I think Texas A&M was one of those schools that really invested a lot in the transfer portal, and NIL situations and things like that. So definitely a big disappointment for them.
Yes, I would agree. But again, that doesn't mean they don't have talent. That doesn't mean that they won't ultimately be a very good football team. But that's a loss that they'll remember for a long time.
Mm-hmm. And then here's another crazy one. Marshall beat Notre Dame 26-21. So Notre Dame, who just was up against Ohio State in week 1, was looking competitive with them until like the fourth quarter. Then they come out and kind of lay an egg against Marshall of all teams. So not a good start for their new coach.
No, that's true. And but that is so classic, right? That you're a team that fights and plays hard against a premier opponent the first week, then you have a disappointing loss at the end, and then the next week you're scheduled to play a team that's maybe not as good, right? Or you don't expect them to be as good, and then you lay the egg.
Right. Yep, that's college football for you.
It is.
That's why we love it. And then in the Big Ten, Wisconsin, who was ranked 19th, lost to Washington State 14-17. And they even had a missed field goal, I remember seeing it earlier in the game. So that 3 points could have been made up by Wisconsin there. So a good win for the Pac-12. And this was one that we gave a prediction for, actually, which was BYU Baylor, a actual matchup of top 25 teams, with BYU being 21 and Baylor being 9. And BYU ended up winning in, I believe it was double overtime, 26-20. Wow. It was at BYU, so that was definitely a factor in it. Though on the previous podcast, we both predicted that Baylor would win.
Yes.
I said 45-35. You said 35-31. So definitely it didn't end up being as high scoring as I was thinking it was going to be. Kind of odd for Baylor, which is known for having a really, that's kind of spread offense, very prolific.
Explosive.
Struggling so much to score against BYU.
Right. Well, and obviously BYU is ranked, so it's not like it was a complete surprise that they were a good football team, right? That was not. But the fact that those are, at least at this point, still scheduled to be future Big 12 brethren in the Big 12 conference is maybe an indication of what the future is going to look like in that conference, because those will be two teams going in that are going to be some of the best teams in that league.
Mm-hmm. And we had Florida going up against Kentucky, number 12 versus number 20. And Kentucky managed to win 26-16 after Florida beat Utah the previous week.
Right.
So that was another upset. Tennessee, ranked 24, beat Pittsburgh, ranked number 17. The score was 34-27. Yep. That was actually the game that was before our game, right. And it went into overtime, and we had to switch the channel to watch our game, as it turned out. And this one's just sad for Nebraska fans. Yeah. Northwestern, the team we lost to in week 1, loses to Duke 31-23.
Well, and more significantly is how they lost to Duke, because they weren't able to run the football. I mean, things that they were able to do with great success against us, they weren't able to do against Duke.
Yeah.
Kind of tells you where we're at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Could also be mentality, because obviously against us, they're the underdogs, whereas against Duke, they're expected to win.
And they were at home, right?
Yeah.
Or no?
I don't know if it was at home or not.
Yeah, I don't remember.
But regardless, not a good look for us. We'll have to see who Georgia Southern plays next week, I guess.
Yes.
And then this rivalry game, classic, Iowa State versus Iowa. Iowa State won in a 10-7 game, so another low-scoring affair for Iowa.
Now, an interesting tie-in to our earlier discussion, Matt Campbell is the coach at Iowa State.
Right. We've talked about him in the past.
And we've talked about him as being a guy that might be in that mix of candidates, has a lot of the characteristics that we'd be looking for. Good fundamentals coach, has done enormously well with the resource limitations and the access to athlete limitations that he has at a place like Iowa State. He has done quite well, but this is the first time he's ever beaten Iowa in his years at Iowa State. He's beaten Texas. He's beaten Oklahoma. In fact, he beat Oklahoma 2 years in a row when they were playing for national championships and had in the Final Four and had Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks.
Right.
So he knows how to prepare a team.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, he is definitely one that would be on my radar, because I like what he's. When we were in the Big 12, in Nebraska and like the Bo Pelini days. Iowa State was like the worst in the division, year in and year out.
Right.
So the fact that he's been able to turn them around, like you say, with the limited resources at that school is pretty impressive.
Yep.
And then looking ahead to week 3, there are a few interesting games, especially within the Big Ten. Michigan State is playing against Washington from the Pac-12. Penn State is playing against Auburn from the SEC. And then we also have BYU coming off of that upset win playing against Oregon. And Miami going up against Texas A&M, who also lost.
Yeah.
So some kind of redemption moments. Oregon had that very ugly loss in their first game against Georgia.
Right.
So we'll have to see if they can bounce back from that. But we're going to focus in on that Penn State-Auburn game. I didn't check where it's being played, so I'll have to double-check that. But what is your prediction for the score there?
Wow. Okay, so... yeah, I'm going to have to admit not knowing much about Auburn.
Yeah, they played two nobodies so far this year.
So it's hard to judge where they're at. And I'm going to, well, tell me where it's at when you get to that, because I think it's important.
At Auburn.
It's at Auburn. Okay, then I'm going to switch. I was leaning Penn State as I contemplated this particular matchup, but I'm going to lean to Auburn because it's at home. For them, I really am. Penn State, played so up and down in week 1 against Purdue.
Yeah.
And so I just don't know how together they are at this point. I know Penn State has a lot of talent, but I'm just not sure, about their stability as a consistent football team. And if you have to go in and play Auburn at Auburn, that is a tough venue, very tough. Mm-hmm. And so I expect Auburn to be the victor in that. Now, score, not knowing what the offenses are really going to be able to produce. So I'm going to say 31-24 Auburn.
Okay. For the sake of creating a little intrigue here, I think I'm going to go with Penn State, say that the higher-ranked team is going to win this one. But I think it will be close because obviously Auburn's a very talented team, and they're playing at home where they typically do better. The Iron Bowl, so many times with Alabama, right? They've managed to pull out the upset when they're playing in their home stadium. So I'll go ahead and say that Penn State wins, let's say 27-24.
Okay.
All right.
A close one.
Mm-hmm. And then the last game, of course, we have to talk about is Nebraska's next game, which is against Oklahoma, classic rival. We played them last year in Oklahoma. This time it's going to be in Lincoln at Memorial Stadium. But obviously, we've just had this huge shakeup, and our defense is playing like garbage. Whereas they haven't played anybody of real significance yet, but they put up great numbers against them. And we did bring it close against them last year. Frankly, should have won. So it'll be interesting to see, they have a new coach, obviously, had to replace a lot of players that transferred out and things like that. So they've got some unknowns going into this game, but we have more, especially with Mickey Joseph now taking over as the coach. Are we going to be able to put something together? I feel pretty good that given how our offense has been so far this year, that we'll be able to score some points. But the problem is if Georgia Southern was able to put up, 45 on us, how much is Oklahoma going to be able to do with all their talent?
Right, exactly. Well, there's a couple of things. Number one, the Oklahoma team is now coached by an intense defensive-minded head coach. Okay, so their defense is going to come ready to play. He is a guy that was around Oklahoma. He was the defensive coordinator at Oklahoma many years ago before he was at Clemson. So right. He knows Oklahoma, is intimately familiar with the tradition and the history of Nebraska versus Oklahoma. So none of that is going to be lost on him. Okay. Secondly, their offense, I think, is actually performing better than I would have maybe expected them to. And the reason we were in the game last year was because our defense played really well against them. Well, our defense is a shadow of its former self from last year. And I have a feeling that he will recognize that, and he's a guy that's super intense, and when he smells blood, he's going to go after it, and I suspect his team will do the same thing. Now, one little interesting caveat, Oklahoma was down in Norman, was the site of the end of Mickey Joseph's career when he was playing for Nebraska as coach. Mickey got tackled out of bounds, a clear personal foul in today's day and age, but wasn't then, and he was thrown into the bench of the players, because back then, well, even now in the Norman family, the stadium there down in Norman, there is a brick wall around the field. Okay, it's not that far from the actual lines, okay?
Right.
And so they had these metal bleachers, and he was thrown into this metal bleacher, and it literally lacerated his calf, just cut it completely open, through the muscle, everything. You could see bone in his calf, and he was never the same after that injury. I mean, he was bleeding like a stuck pig, too. And he's going to remember that.
Well, yeah, I don't think that's something you forget.
Right. So just maybe he'll be able to. You'll hear that story. I'm guaranteeing you, in the prep for this matchup, they're going to talk about that. They'll probably show that thing over and over again. I don't know.
We'll might be a little gruesome.
Yeah. It wasn't that bad on TV until later. There were like photography photos and stuff that captured better than the. Because, it was grainy back then.
Right.
This is in 1980.
Well, right. Well, I remember you telling me that story before. I didn't realize that was Mickey Joseph, our now current head coach.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah, that is interesting. And it's Brett Venables is the current head coach there at Oklahoma. And you're right. Yeah, he is. Obviously, did great things with the defense at Clemson, especially during their national championship years and all that stuff. So
he's a crazy man.
Right.
He really is. He just goes nuts.
Yeah. So I'd like to be optimistic and think that we can keep it close at least, and we do have a penchant during the Scott Frost era of losing close games. So if he's good at one thing, it's been that. So I'm gonna go ahead and predict that Oklahoma wins, but that we keep it competitive and that it's not a blowout. But that will be high scoring. So I'll go ahead and say, let's say 49 for Oklahoma and 42 Nebraska.
Wow. Okay.
I'm being optimistic.
I'm going to say that it's going to be 56-14 Oklahoma.
Oof.
I think Oklahoma is going to take us behind the woodshed and beat us to a pulp. I think that Venables would like nothing more than to be able to just embarrass the shit out of Nebraska in their home stadium. Mm-hmm. So I if he gets the opportunity, he's going to do it. And if things don't go well for us early, I think this thing could come undone really fast for Nebraska. So we'll see. I'm hopeful that what you say is true, and that we have a fired up crowd, because people are going to be wanting to support the team and wanting to support Mickey in his first game, as interim coach and everything. And there's going to be great energy in that crowd to begin the game. But then the game starts, and our lack of talent on the defensive line and the offensive line is going to show itself rather quickly against a very talented Oklahoma team, and then ugly things happen.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And of course, this is the classic Red River shootout rivalry, from past years.
No, it is not.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's the Texas.
That's the
Texas rivalry.
Oklahoma.
But
it's a historic rivalry.
Yes, it's a historic rivalry with Oklahoma. So I was expecting that no matter what, the stadium's going to be fired up. The fans are going to be excited for that game, even though we're the underdogs. But I also think that takes a bit of pressure off of us, because we have been the favorites in the 3 games so far, and in games where we have been the underdogs, in the past few years, we've been able to keep it close a lot of the times.
Right.
Frankly, should have won many of them, where
right.
we were in the lead going into the fourth quarter or something.
That is true.
So,
and I have to say, again, we don't lack talent. We, especially with our offensive skills people, if our offensive line could just get their stuff together and really start to play as a cohesive unit, and they did, it's Georgia Southern, but in the second half, there was a pocket for Thompson a lot of the time, and all he needs is a pocket. His problem is when he starts getting happy feet, his performance deteriorates rapidly, That's what I've seen in these first 3 games. So we need him to feel comfortable in that pocket.
Yeah. And one thing we didn't mention earlier about the Georgia Southern game that I'm going to go back to for just a moment is to compliment Clay Helton, their coach, for coming in with a good scheme to go up against Nebraska, and for their players for executing at a high level. Even though the quarterback threw 2 interceptions, in general, he was on point the whole game, and like they had a wide receiver who made like a beautiful one-handed catch, the quarterback throwing these dimes over receiver shoulders into the end zone and stuff like that. So,
and our coverage was good.
A lot of the time.
Coverage was good.
A lot of the time. So, you have to give them credit, for coming in and executing at a high level, not making too many penalties.
Right.
With the exception of the first half mess up, which was a big mistake by them. That's something I'm curious to see, if we can catch Oklahoma a little flat-footed, that would be great. Though the fact that we came so close to beating them last year makes me think they'll be a little more focused this time.
Exactly. And we don't have the defense to hang with them.
Unlike last year.
And that's the thing. Defense travels, offense not so much, right? So the problem is that since our weakness this year is our defense, you just don't know what's going to happen with our offense. Are we going to be able to move against this team? Because they're going to be the best defense we've played by far.
Right.
So I think our offensive production is going to be greatly diminished. And I'm worried about Thompson's life.
Yeah, he did get sacked twice against Georgia Southern. And that
Oklahoma's got a different level of athlete.
Yeah, Oklahoma's going to be coming for that hard. So, yeah, we'll have to see how that plays out. We'll probably do our next podcast remotely again because I'll be heading back to LA after the Oklahoma game. But it's been great to be here in person with you, Dad, to do the podcast like the good old days.
I'm glad we got to do it this way.
Yep. And even though it was a loss, it was fun being together as our whole family pretty much was together for
and you were the optimist all the way to the end, and I was the miserable pessimist.
Yes.
Which is also typical.
Yes. I'm here to try to bring him out of the dumps, see the glass is half full, But we'll see how much I'm able to do that against Oklahoma.
Exactly.
All right. So if you all out there enjoyed listening to this podcast, you can reach out to us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You can leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. We'd love to hear from you guys about what we can improve with the podcast and your thoughts on who would be a good candidate for the next head coach of Nebraska.
That's a great idea.
Mm-hmm. So thank you all out there for listening, and thank you, Dad, for joining me. Until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.